Hello, I am Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be discussing the new version 11.1 update that just was released in Puzzles and Dragons. So, as of any update, there are usually exciting times because new features, new evolutions, and new mechanics are introduced. Now, there has been quite a few different evolutions released, but I will be covering that in a subsequent and separate article/video. So, in this article, I'm going to be focusing on the new awakenings, the tiny bit of mail, but mostly on the 3-player co-op feature. So, right now, we have just been introduced to bonus or follow-up attack awakening. So, basically, this completes the holy trinity, so to speak, of powerful awakenings, because right now, guard break and 7 combos were the strongest, and now follow-up attack joins those ranks. So, follow-up attack allows you to deal 1 additional damage after you trigger all your other damage from your various matching sources. This will occur when you match a column of heart orbs, and while it may seem a little unusual at first glance, this is actually the cleanest way to kill resolve bosses, because resolve bosses will trigger their 1% execution and rage, probably lethal ability, when you one-shot them when they're above their threshold. And when normally this would be a problem because you'd have to either bring a delay, damage control, or gravities to dance around. But if you have this bonus/follow-up attack awakening, you are able to actually just kill them with relative ease. You simply match that column of hearts, ideally on the left or right hand side, and then play with that 5x5 board that you have left over. 6x5 minus a column is 5x5. So you have 25 orbs to work with. You have essentially 8 combos worth, potentially, I believe it should be. So you have you basically can make potentially 9 combos. So you have enough to overcome combo shields. You can kill their resolve. And this is, to a certain extent, a form of power creep, because now we have a very clean and tidy way to deal with what were somewhat the most challenging bosses in the game. However, one thing I do want to point out is that this column of hearts is actually very punishing for row teams, and Gung-Ho is definitely pushing the combo/TPA meta, because row teams cannot make use of this follow-up attack awakening, and that is problematic if your primary team is row-based, because you'll have to deal with the resolve bosses like some sort of savage. Like, you'll actually have to use puzzling skills. So it's an interesting direction that the game is taking, and you have to start possibly even rethinking of what team composition you bring for resolve heavy dungeons. Now, this is a new awakening, so you have to keep in mind that not every card's going to have it. We'll get them in the future as more evolutions are released. For example, all the Norns of Erd, Skald, Verdandi gain this follow-up attack awakening with their split evolution. There is some changes in the mail, just more sorting options. Yeah, okay, cool. Onto the 3-player co-op, which is probably the main source of interest for most players watching this video. So, if you have been loving co-op, you are going to love 3-player even more, because now you can disappoint twice the number of people for less stamina. Probably not the best way to introduce 3-player co-op, but it is a new gameplay mode which actually does address a lot of the issues that co-op mode did present itself. So, the first thing that occurs is that there will be actually more dungeons released in the future. We don't have many at the moment, just evolutions. I think they're just testing with easier dungeons to see if things go badly or well. There will be new content coming out eventually for it. I will cover that when it does get released. So, what separates 3-player co-op from solo as well as 2-player co-op is that there are 3 unique teams, because this almost will feel like you're having a soloistic journey, because if you do, say, go through the auto match mode feature, which basically which will find and pair you up with 2 other players, you don't actually get to see their teams, because I just tested it out once randomly, and I don't see their teams until we actually enter the dungeon, and your health pools are actually not shared. So you basically are kind of playing on your own while sharing the same board. So, for example, let's say you have an Anubis team and you have 38,000 health. That's how much health you have. If player B has Dark Athena of 60,000, they have 60,000 health. Player C has Kusanagi Hime with 55,000, that's how much health they have. So if you are playing Anubis and you take 10,000 damage, you go down to 28,000 health. Your allies are not affected, they're still at full health. Conversely, if you were to just simply die, get hit by, like, say, something that's for 100,000 damage and get smacked, you die, you finish, your run is over. Your teammates still get to continue. You don't get to play along, you're done. So that is an interesting aspect because it's going to feel like you're almost playing solo mode, but in the presence of two other players. But you do have to share the board because if you are, say, Anubis and you match your board and whatever is left over, that gets transferred to the next player. So that's what they have to deal with. So there can be a certain degree of setting up or orb changers that you can use to try and help your allies. But for the most part, you kind of want to just play on your own, which is an interesting twist overall, I would say. So another thing to keep in mind is that if your allies do heal, it doesn't actually heal you because, again, your health pool is not shared. And that's something I want to stress because this can result in failed team compositions because you might bring someone who you think is going to be tankier, but you end up realizing you're quite vulnerable because you don't have these other benefits two-player co-op did have. So this is interesting because it is putting a twist on how we play Puzzle and Dragons, so I do like that for the most part. And I just realized my camera's a little too widescreen, and I'm back to normal. So one thing I want to stress is that this is going to be much less forgiving than two-player co-op, because in two-player co-op there were too many benefits because you did have a shared health pool and you did have shared awakenings of skill bind resist, skill boost, blind resist, poison, jammer, as well as recover bind, as well as cross-team bind clears through active skills, and it also cost half stamina. So there was almost no motivation to play solo mode, in all honesty, because co-op mode just did everything better. And this is a problem because co-op mode is too strong, and there was no distinct gameplay mode of only co-op dungeons that made it problematic, or even if they had the same dungeons scaled for two-player mode, because they tend to make dungeons almost like a 1.5 difficulty. Solo mode can handle like 1.0 difficulties, co-op can handle 2.0. And if co-op mode, if all dungeons are designed at 1.5, it's too easy for co-op, too challenging for solo, for the most part. Of course, there are exceptions, but things are not designed very well around this, and it made it very problematic because co-op was a little too overpowering for the most part. So three-player mode removes basically all of these benefits. There's no shared awakenings, there's no shared health pool, you don't get to clear binds across teams. I'm not sure about the stamina cost, but you also don't even get to use the solo mode badge. So this is actually going to be quite punishing for many teams because now you need to have a very elite team to function well in three-player co-op because you have no help whatsoever. And on that train of thought, I want to describe the characteristics of what makes a strong three-player co-op team. So because you don't have all these benefits and perks, you are going to have to somewhat rethink the way you approach your three-player co-op team because a lot of the teams and strategies before don't apply anymore. So first things first, you need to have at least full skill bind resist. If you don't, you're going to cause problems for yourself and your allies because I believe if you get skill bound, everyone gets skill bound, and that's just rude. You also need to make sure you have sufficient skill boost to actually have active skills ready in case you need them by turn 1, as well as having the capacity to deal with binds and have enough health to survive most normal attacks. So as a generalization, these are things that you want to look for when trying to pick a strong co-op team. You want to have bind immune leaders. You want to have at least 100%, ideally a bit more skill bind resist in case someone gets bound. You need to have a strong base active skill across all of your cards because, again, there is no skill boost involved and your active skills only charge up on your turn. So those inherits are never going to come up for the most part. You need to have, ideally, a health and recovery multiplier so you can actually survive. You also should be able to activate your multiplier off of most given boards. If you're very orb hungry or requiring very complex orb distributions, you may falter because you won't be able to have active skills in time. Your board, you can't set it up, that sort of idea. You also want to multiplier that scales very quickly. You need to deal very large amounts of damage with potentially very few orbs on the board. And finally, you tend to want to place less emphasis on monocolor or orb-hungry teams. Again, because you can't set up your board, there's no skill boost. Well, there's less skill boost, so you don't have your active skills as rarely available, and it just makes it more problematic overall. So, following those given guidelines, teams such as Kusanagi Hime, Dark Athena, and Anubis are all fantastic three-player co-op teams because they're very self-sufficient. They're durable, they have high explosive damage, and they have low dependency on active skill usage, Anubis being the exception that you need to use active skills, but it's not the same. You can activate off a given board. On the other hand, powerful leaders such as Mary, Dark Metatron, and Krishna will have a tougher time because they require more orbs. They're just more orb hungry, so you need more active skills. You need health management for Dark Metatron, so it just is more problematic. You can't set up your board and plan ahead of time. So while these leaders are very powerful, they're just not going to perform as well because you need to either coordinate very well with your teammates or potentially run the same team across everyone, so you have that ability to at least hoard orbs or manage hard orbs more intelligently for Dark Metatron. So if you're doing random matchmaking, I would definitely suggest bringing the more top tier meta teams because they are more self-sufficient and safe. But if you're playing with friends or people you've organized with, you can get away with these less meta teams because you have at least coordination, hopefully, between each other. And speaking of coordination, I don't want you to be that guy or girl because griefing or intentionally losing is a bannable offense in Japan, and I don't see any reason why North America wouldn't follow suit. And this essentially occurs for the most part when you, say, play a leader who cannot connect 3 orbs and they just make a boatload of poison orbs. They basically have the board filled with poison orbs and the turn goes to their friend. Their friend has no way to counter it and they just simply die. Like, it's kind of rude, to be honest. And if you're wasting someone else's stamina, that is a problem. So don't be that person. People will report you. Just throwing it out there. The only exception to that is if obviously you're a range of friends and it's obviously agreed upon that you can do silly things. But when playing with random people, don't do these sort of stuff. And on that same train of thought, you really shouldn't play jammer or poison teams because it's going to cause problems because the board is shared. You create all these jammer poison orbs. It's good for you, bad for everyone else. Unless, of course, everyone is using jammers and poisons. So, in conclusion, this is quite an exciting update, especially with the new evolutions, which I'll cover in a subsequent video. But 3-player co-op is going to pave the way for very challenging and tough dungeons, as well as kind of almost rekindling that solo-esque feel because you are much more independent. You're not banking as hard on your allies compared to before. So let me know what you think about 3-player co-op in the comments below. Hopefully you all have a mantastic day, and happy puzzling. I will also have a video about 3-player sample gameplay and what to do and what not to do coming out very soon.